Well, good day, everybody. This is Joe. Welcome back to the channel. Well, let's see. We're sort of sequestered by a roughly 6-foot distance across the table. I'm down at the front porch of Kevin Kittle's house, and we decided in the midst of being isolated, we're going to sort of try this partial isolation across the table kind of a thing.
Well, as I mentioned to you once before, Joe, we were talking about doing a journal. We were going to go to Australia, but because of the coronavirus pandemic, our Australia trip got canceled. And so one of the things that I was going to do on that Australia trip was try to actually start journaling, typing, whatever, to log the trip, but not just a journal in the sense like I was there and this is what we did type of thing. More of a cross between that and idea notes. You know, you write notes like I've seen you do, where you write notes down and stuff like that, of making ideas. And so it's kind of a cross between that. And so I titled it Muse of History because I went to a thesaurus and thought, well, how many different ways can you say journal? And there was, that's one of the idea. There was 148 different ways you could say the word journal, according to this thesaurus. And I thought, well, that's a lot. Anyway, so what I did, I was trying to figure out the right format, because what I want to journal on mostly is via typewriter. So if you buy any journal book that's pre-bound, well, you can't put it in a typewriter.
Right.
And then if you end up with ones that have perforated sheets, you end up taking those out, but then you can't put it back in the binding. So I made my own design, and what I did, and I came up with a size, just trial and error trying to come up with it. And also partly because I have a particular type of paper. It's an erasable bond paper that's done in the one of the folio sizes, and it happens to be 8.5 by 13. So as not to not waste paper when I cut it, but to take it down from that 13-inch length down to something a little more reasonable, I just cut it in half. So it ends up being 8.5 wide by 6.5 dimension. And then I made a cover for it, just something to kind of protect it. And then I've had a comb binding system that I can bind it up together. But what I did is made the pages, I punched them for the comb binding, so they would go in after you type, and typing on both sides of the paper. That's kind of the whole format. And then I use this erasable bond paper because since I'm using manual typewriters a lot, it makes it easier. And it's a little off-white, so it doesn't work really well for fixing your mistakes with the correction tape, which is a bright white. But since this has that coating from the erasable paper, then it erases really easily, using a typewriter eraser pencil with the brush on it, and I like it. So actually what I've been doing since then with this isolation situation that we have is actually writing with it. The writing itself is, I guess it's one of those things that, you know, if you write enough of the bad stuff will get out of your system, so eventually the good stuff shows up. So I'm kind of thinking this is all the bad writing in here, you know, hopefully it will go away.
You have to purge it.
Have to purge it, you know, and it's not really a diary, which is another word for journal, because I'm not really getting intimate with details in my emotional life and things like that, which, you know, if you do that, then you really want somebody to read it. And that's, you know, this isn't really for anybody to read. I don't even know if I'll go back and reread this stuff. I mean, it's just a matter of just writing for practice, for one. And then to get ideas down. And so then what I've done on this is I've mentioned a little bit about our coronavirus problem, not a lot. And I've just talked about different typewriters I'm using, because that's one of our passions, is writing with a typewriter. So in this, I've actually gone through in the last number of days, and I've used, I don't know, 4 or 5 different typewriters. So the first one is in this beautiful purple ink script typeface on the Adler, which is really neat. That was the one I was taking to Australia. And then we were over your house before we all got sequestered, so to speak. I was using the Remington Noiseless 7 and learning how to type with that. And then that's where I kind of learned that changing my technique a little bit caused less skipping with that. And so then, since it's a worldwide pandemic, I got out the typewriter from India, the Godrig.
Oh, yes.
You know, which actually is, you know, it's not a very good-looking typewriter, but boy, does it functions really well. It's got a good touch typewriter. You can see that it's got this blue ribbon in there, and you know, it's just a good working typewriter. There's no doubt about it. started using, this is what I did with the Voss, which is the newest typewriter in my collection, is a Voss S24. They don't really have a name, and I think that's the model number, or it might be an ST24, depending on what year it was made. I did look it up. It was made in 1958. And I used a purple ribbon in that because I'm kind of getting fond of purple ribbons. And then I went to your wonderfully repaired Torpedo 18B and worked with that. And it puts out a nice typewriter, and it's good to type with. The only disadvantage it has as far as working is that it does shadow the characters slightly. And then I went to my Olympia SM4 in comparison, which has wonderful type. I mean, it's virtually flawless. It's probably one of the best working typewriters. The only thing that's unusual is because it's got that Swedish keyboard, so some of the characters are in different spots.
Yeah.
And then I switched over to the SM7, which has another type of script typewriter with a purple ribbon in, which it works virtually flawless. It's like a brand new machine. And that's where I ended there at that point, with just trying different typewriters and see how I felt about them. And so it's kind of fun. But what I like about the format is that it gives you plenty of line space, but not too much line space. It also works with the characters per line theory that we are reminiscing about and ruminating over. Is that the right word? That might be right. That how many characters across and stuff like that. So I know with on this size of paper, you can do 60 characters across for an 11-pitch typewriter, and then maybe 1 or 2 extra characters just for margin release, so to speak. And then when you go to the 10-pitch characters, which a lot of the machines have, you go to 54 characters plus 1 or 2. And I haven't done the 12 character. I was just going to start doing that on my IBM Selectric, putting in 12 characters and see how that works out. Which that case would be probably, if it's 60 characters, probably either 66 characters across is probably what that'll end up being. What's interesting is that theory seems to hold. I was practicing with the Selectric, and I did it on an 8.5 by 11 using half-inch margins. So your writing surface is 7.5, and so that comes across, and it was 90 characters. But as we found, that once the more characters you have, the less you need for the little bit of extra characters after your main body. So I didn't put in anything after that, and that was like working perfect on 12 pitch for half-inch margin, 7.5-inch writing width. But what's nice about when you do this, okay, so you type on it. I typed on this particular page, just the one side so far, and then I'll type on the back page. And once you've done that, this comb binding allows you to spread it fairly easily. And then to just pop the pages in. You can just spread them, and it's already cut, and it goes together really well. And the whole idea is sort of like what you've done with your notebooks that you were for your
disc binding.
Yeah, the disc binding, and you've got lots of notebooks you've written about your photography stuff. It just gives you a place to put it all together, and you don't have the loose pages. And by being a journal, you try to write more.
How do you think journaling has changed your writing? Do you think it has?
It's interesting. Most of what I've been doing writing here, this is a little bit so far in journaling. It's sort of like what you and I have been doing when we're sitting here just throwing ideas around, and we just talk about, oh, what about this idea? And then we try to expound upon it a little bit in what I'm writing. And that's sort of what I've been doing here. I've never been fond of the type of journal writing, which, having edited a car club newsletter for so many years, and you get these people that go to a car show and they have a great time, and then they write back and says, oh, we went to the car show, we had a great time, wish you were there. And it becomes really, in my mind, it logs the event, but it's boring. And I try to write better than that, not necessarily successfully, but try to make it less boring. And that's kind of what this journal is. I will probably put in a little bit of that, okay, we did this and this is what happened type of thing. It's sort of like you talk about that stream of consciousness where you do it on a roll. And that's kind of what this is. Right. Even though we're doing not on a roll and you have to interrupt yourself with paper change and stuff like that, it's just that this is what I'm thinking about.
Oh, yeah.
And then you try to expound upon an idea, maybe pursue it a little bit in depth in what you're writing there. And then writing that down, I think, is good
Yeah.
because then it helps you clarify what it is you're thinking about. A lot of times when we end up talking, and just like what I'm doing right now, we end up rambling a little bit,
Right.
trying to pursue the idea. And that's okay, but you don't necessarily get your thoughts really clarified. And I think that's sort of what this journal is helping to do, is to make your thoughts a little more clear. So.